Hello, I'm Adrian Ashton, and welcome to this first session about being a trustee. Now, rather than submit you to have to watch an epic 3 hour long marathon epic about the roles and responsibilities, the technicalities, the legal stuff, we've broken this down into shorter sections so you can dip in and out according to your own pace. Now, this first session that we've recorded is just about setting the scene, really. And actually, we're not going to go into great depth and detail here. We're going to make a quiz of this because actually, my idea is as a trustee or as a trustee to be, you may actually know more about this role than you think you do already. And the idea of this quiz is quite a simple quiz, really. It's true and false. 10 questions based on scenarios. And all you have to do as we go through this session is just to tick off on a bit of paper or count on your fingers if you think they're true or if you think they're false. After we go through each one, I'll give you the answer, not to keep you waiting until the end in suspense. But then also as we go through each one, we'll offer a little bit of additional clarification as to why it is that way within a charity and why it has to be that happenstance for a trustee as we go through. And at the end, we'll kind of talk briefly about where you go from here in continuing your journey and understanding what it means to be a trustee of the charity. So let's crack on, shall we? First question in the true-false quiz. Number one, every charity has this thing called a governing document. You may have heard of it, may sound familiar. It's usually called a constitution or a set of rules, sometimes articles. So the question is, true or false? As a trustee, you don't actually need to read it. You just need to know where you can find it because by and large, you know what the charity's set up to do. You're there to have oversight. So we just bob on, right? So, but it's useful to know if there's a disagreement, if we're not quite sure, then we can go and check the rules. Is that true or false? So as a trustee, you don't need to read or know what's in the governing document, true or false. The answer is false, because that governing document sets out the rules of the charity. A charity is a legally regulated organization, a legal body. As such, it's beholden to certain laws and legislation. And that governing document sets out what you as trustees can do, how far you can take a decision, the limits of your authority. And you need to know that, because if you accidentally transgress that, if you accidentally act in a way which is outside of the authority that this governing document has given you, then technically you're breaking charity law and you're acting in a way which is illegal for the charity, and that can cause all sorts of problems. So it's worth actually digging through that governing document. Now, as part of this series of sessions, we're actually going to have one of the sessions is looking at the charity's governing document, actually explaining it in plain English and what the key parts are, when they might come into effect and when you might need to know them. So, second question, treasurers. Now, some of you may be aware of this, but as a charity, you have to nominate a chair, a secretary, and a treasurer. So, is this true or false? If you are the treasurer in the charity, then you take ultimate responsibility for all financial matters. The buck stops with you when it comes to accounts or bookkeeping or the money. Is that true or false? It's false, I'm afraid. The trustee is a named title. The trustee is the person who is the go-to person, is the focal point, is the person who says, are we up to date with this? I'll step up to say, let's make sure we're doing it. But as a board of trustees, you are all equally responsible and technically liable. If the treasurer drops the ball, then everyone has dropped the ball. If the treasurer gets it right, then everyone has got it right. If someone's the treasurer, then they need supporting in that role as well, because you all have a shared and equal liability and a diligence requirement to make sure it's happening right. It's just that the person who's the treasurer is the person, when it comes around to looking at the accounts, steps forward and takes a lead on those conversations. Okay, number three. A trustee may be elected. So it may be that the charity says, you know what, we've decided we're going to hold elections, we're going to open up our membership, and we're going to ask younger people. So if people are in a youth in the community can nominate, can elect a trustee to the board of the charity. Sounds great. Really good way to get representation there. And legally, is this true or false? So the statement is, legally, if young people have elected you as a trustee to the board of the charity, then you are there to represent and act in the interests of those young people, of that group who elected you. Okay, is that true or false? It's false, which sounds a bit perverse, but legally, as trustees, you must always act in the best interests of the charity as a whole, not in the best interests of a single interest group. Okay, the charity is there for the wider public benefit, not for an individual benefit or a small group benefit. Now, that can cause a bit of tension. So if you decide that you want to have elections, if you say, I'm here because I've been put forward by young people or older people or local businesses, that's great. You are their liaison person, their go-to point. You are not there solely to act in their interests. You can bring their voice, but that doesn't mean that you act in the way that they direct you to. Number 4, okay. Sounds a bit doom and gloom so far, but let's see in terms of how the true false statements play out as we go along further. Number 4, as a trustee, you can only act on your own behalf if you've been authorized to do so. So let's say, for example, that the charity has been approached by the local press saying, we want someone to give us an interview about this contentious issue. That the local council says, we're going to tear down the park. And they've approached you and say, we want to interview you as a trustee of the charity that looks after the park, has an interest in the park, to speak to us about what you think about that. And you think this is great because, yes, the park needs protecting and it's really important. You can only act in that way. You can only speak out on behalf of the charity, act as a trustee, if your fellow trustees have mandated you to, have said, that's okay. Yeah, so you can only act on your behalf. You can only go off and speak and act as a trustee if the rest of the trustees have said, yep, that's okay, you go off and do that, regardless of how strongly you may feel about that situation. Is that true or false? It's true. Again, think back to what we've covered already in this session. Trustees and the board have a shared and equal responsibility. If one trustee speaks out, the law says all the trustees are assumed to have had the same position. So it's important to have some clear guidelines for this and maybe some rules and policies that says if a trustee is approached by the media or someone else for comment or interview, then there's a clear procedure to make sure that the rest of the trustees are in agreement that they're the best person to speak on behalf of the charity, because what they say, how they act, the other trustees will be accountable for, will be responsible for, because it's a shared and equal responsibility. It's not all on one person. Okay? It's important to kind of keep that harmony going. Number 5, okay, halfway through now, divided loyalties. Okay, so let's say, for example, you are a trustee of the charity here, and you are part of a working group, or you're a member of sort of a small community project over there. Okay, it's not a charity, it's just a company, something else. Okay, so you're a trustee here and you're involved as a volunteer over there. Something happens between that project over there and the charity here, where you're a trustee, and you're caught in the middle of it. Okay, something's kicked off. You're the person in between. You have a divided loyalty. You want to support this project, and you're a trustee here. So is it true or false that regardless of what your position is over there as an employee or volunteer, if you are a trustee here, that trumps it, that takes precedent? If you have a conflict of interest, a divided loyalty, where you are a trustee takes precedent. That comes first over any other commitment you may have. And that's true. Legally, charity trusteeship hits the top of the pyramid. And that's why it's really important to manage conflicts of interest as trustees and as a charity. So many charities have policies and procedures that say we keep a register of any potential conflicts of interest before they even arise. So if there's the hint that they could come up, if there's a whiff of something that says this might cause a problem for Bob or Linda or Glinda, or whoever it is, in terms of that conflict of interest, we can preempt it. We can protect that individual trustee from being compromised so they can continue to act with integrity and not feel that they're having to make impossible decisions. Okay, so into the second half now, in terms of the true false quiz. How are we doing so far? Are you feeling you're doing okay? So hopefully by this point, there's at least one or two that you've gotten right in terms of the true false, which gives you some assurance that actually maybe you do know more about this whole trusteeship game than you thought you did. Because again, as we're going through, it starts to sound like it's, well, that sounds like common sense. And a lot of this stuff actually is when we sort of strip it away and peel it back. But I'm going to carry on with the quiz. We've still got 5 more questions to get through. So number 6, in terms of keeping your tally score. The scenario is that the board has taken a decision. It's contentious. It came to a vote. All of your fellow trustees voted one way, in favour of the decision, and you voted against it. You voted to say, no, we shouldn't do this thing. Because it was a vote, because the vote was in the majority to carry the decision through and you objected, if you carry on being a trustee, if you carry on being part of the board, you are liable and responsible for that decision, even though it clearly states on the record that you voted against it. Is that true or false? If you stay on the board, you are responsible for all the decisions the board as a whole takes, regardless of whether you supported them or not. True or false? It's true, because again, we've touched upon this a few times already, the board have a shared and equal and collective responsibility for the charity. The board stands together or the board falls together. And that means in practice, if there's a tricky decision to be made, if it's contentious, if it's come to it and said, oh, actually, one or two of us really objected, but the rest felt we had to push it through, then those who voted against it have to think carefully about whether they carry on as trustees. Because if they feel that strongly about it, then they should resign. Because otherwise they will be liable and responsible for that, even though they didn't want to see it happen. And it's important to have that conversation with them because, again, you're trying to support each other all as trustees. You're trying to avoid putting each other in potentially compromising situations if you can help it. So air the conversation early. Number 7, okay, bit about the money now. So your governing document, so think back to question 1. You know where your governing document is now, your constitutional rules or articles. You've had a read through, brilliant, well done you. But there's a clause in it that says you can't be paid. So as it says, trustees cannot receive payment for being trustees, for services rendered. Now, what that means in practice is you can't claim expenses. So if you've bought some food for a trustee meeting, if you've paid out for a license fee for some software or a membership subscription on behalf of the charity, you can't claim that back because the governing document says you can't receive payment. So you can't receive, that also includes expenses. Is that true or false? It's false. Because the principle on this is, as trustees, you should not be out of pocket for what you do. You're not making money. The phrase and the reference about not receiving payment is in connection with being paid for professional services, for delivering goods, for being employed. As trustees, you are there to act as the guardians of the charity, to have oversight of it. That means that you shouldn't be out of pocket. So if you incur an expense, just as if you were employed and you put in your end of month expenses claim, it works the same way here as well. Now, you can choose as a trustee not to claim those expenses. That's fine. You can choose as a trustee to claim those expenses and gift them back to the charity or to another project in the community. Or as a trustee, you can choose to reclaim those expenses and you go, you know what, actually, this is really welcome because, at the moment, money in the household's quite tight. I can give my time, but I can't really afford to give anything more. That's fine too. Again, just have clarity on that and work it out. Number 8. So as a board of trustees, you're facing a decision. Here's the scenario. You're facing a decision and you're not quite sure. You've got a choice to make. And you're not sure you understand all of the options properly. You think you might be missing some bits of information. So you should take advice. So you should go out and ask other people's views. True or false? Or should you just wing it? Should you go, well, we're trustees, we should know enough, let's just do it. If you're not confident, if you're unsure about something, then you should always seek advice. True or false? It's true. Because as trustees, you are legally responsible for the charity. So why would you put yourself in a position that opens you up for having it come back at you? Absolutely. Take advice from take it from a number of sources. Test it and weight it. Because anyone who offers you advice is offering you a perspective, is offering you their understanding. So ask different people, go to different places and weigh it up for yourself, because whoever offers you that advice will not have to live with the consequences of how you use it. You do. So be confident about the advice you're given. Don't be afraid to question it. Don't be afraid to test it. And if you think it's appropriate, don't be afraid to disregard it. But inform yourself, come to a well-rounded view that you feel confident, that you feel we now understand and know enough to make this decision. Okay, the penultimate question. We're nearly there. Number 9, a CIO. Now, a CIO stands for a charitable incorporated organization. Okay, this is charitable form. A CIO, charitable incorporated organization. Now, there are other forms of charity out there that you might be aware of. So a CIO is a relatively new format. So traditionally we had charities, charitable companies, and now a CIO, the charitable incorporated organization. And they all ultimately report back up to the Charity Commission. So in this scenario, a CIO is subject to the same rules and legislation and laws as a charitable company. So maybe that you're a trustee of a charitable company, the company that's also a charity, or vice versa. You've got a good handle and understanding in that. So in this instance, yep, it's the same stuff here. We know this is great. We know what we do. Is that true or false? CIO, same rules and laws as a charitable company. It's false. Okay, and that might be a bit surprising. And that's because a charitable incorporated organization is only accountable to the Charity Commission. Okay? It is solely governed as a charity by charity laws and legislation. A charitable company, in contrast, is a charity and a company. So a charitable company is also accountable and bound to the Charity Commission, but it is also accountable and bound to Companies House and company law. There are some additional whistles and bells and odd quirks that exist there as well. So a CIO has a bit less legislation and regulation to worry about than a charitable company. So actually, it's not the same. There are some subtle differences. We're not going to go into those in great depth here. Don't panic. But it's just to flag it up to say, just because you've been a trustee of one does not automatically mean it's the same in the other. There are some tweaks and bells to be aware of. And finally, the last question. As a board of trustees, we're responsible, we're leading the charity, but it's not down to us to do it all day to day. As a board of trustees, we can employ and delegate tasks and responsibilities to staff and workers and volunteers. Okay? But if they drop the ball, they make a mistake, it's us as the trustees who remain ultimately liable and responsible for that. Okay, so we've employed people, there's a contract of employment, there's HR in place, but if they get it wrong, it comes back on us. Whether that's fair or not, is that true or false? It's true. Because again, we've mentioned this a few times now, trustees, the buck stops with you. You have the ultimate responsibility in a charity. You've got to make sure it remains solvent. That means financially viable, able to pay its bills. You've got to make sure it's compliant, which means it's adhering, it's ticking the box with all the relevant legislation and rules that it's governed by as a charity and the activities it delivers. And that it's also delivering on what it says it's going to be doing as well, what it says on the tin. You're the people who have oversight of that. So it's about important to make sure that you are confident there are enough checks and balances, reporting systems, oversight procedures that give you that confidence that, yep, things are on track and we're comfortable with stuff. You don't have to micromanage this. You just need a system to make sure, yep, we're confident, things are on track, we're satisfied. Okay, so 10 questions, true and false. How did we do? So just to reassure you, my experience of doing this quiz, not in a pre-recorded way, but in a live session, either in a room, on a telephone conference, or over a video call, no one has ever got all 10 absolutely correct. Some people have hit 8 or 9. No one's ever hit all 10 perfectly first time round. So on that basis, if you didn't score the perfect 10, don't worry. Okay, I'm not here to enforce it. No one's going to check up on your score. And if you didn't get at least 6 of them right, that's it. You're barred from being a trustee. The idea of this session was just to start to introduce some of the dimensions, some of the scenarios, some of the practicalities of being a trustee, what it means in practice and how it all relates, how it all starts to fit together. What I'd encourage you to do as well after this session, if possible, so depending how you feel you got on, is to chat to some other people. Again, you are a board of trustees. You're all in this together. You're equally responsible. You stand together. So if you're not sure about something, if you think, oh, do we have a practice about that? Or maybe we should put something in place about that. Or even, I was a charity over there and they had a way of doing it that might be interesting here to bring across. Use this session, the thoughts, the prompts it's given you to start those conversations, to bring in change, to make sure that as a trustee, you have got everything to hand that you need, and you are most confident. Because if we're confident about doing something, we make better decisions. Things work better for everyone. That's the idea of these sessions. I said at the start, this is one in a kind of a mini series. So the other series that the other kind of videos we've got coming up in this kind of collected series, we've got another session that kind of suggests where you can find the hidden documents, these magic constitutions, conflicts of interest policy, all these things that I've kind of alluded to in that true false quiz. Where can you actually find those things, and what do you need to be looking for to make sure that you've got those as a checklist? You know, have we got everything we need? Where do we find it? And what do we need to do and when as a trustee in terms of with the Charity Commission? Make sure they're all happy. So we've got that as a session coming up. And then there's another session, like I said, it actually takes you through the charity's constitution itself. Now, it's not going to be me sitting here reading it out as a script in a dramatic reading style. It will be me sharing with you on the screen like this some extracts. Okay, so I'll pull out some sections of the Constitution as a screen grab, put them on the screen here with you, and then actually just explain and talk through in hopefully plain English what they mean in practice and how they relate to you, so that as a trustee, you know what's in your governing document, and you know then as different scenarios come up, you don't have to memorize it, but you know where it is in the governing document to check back, so you know what you can do, the limits of the authority, and the ways in which different scenarios and situations can be approached. So thanks for sticking with this session. And like I say, just a bit of a quiz to kick you off into the introductions, the practicalities of being a trustee. Hopefully you found it useful. There's been something that surprised you, something that's encouraged you and reassured you. And hopefully I'll see you again on the other side of the camera for the next sessions as well.